Hello there, welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd World Empire, and this as an episode is going to be a little bit speculative because we don't have much canon information on these things, but I wanted to explore them because they're kind of a cool concept. It makes a lot of sense for this very peaceful, very scientific organization like Starfleet that doesn't have a military of any kind, apparently, except for the Starfleet Marines. But, you know, aside from them, and the Defiant class warships and Red Squad, but aside from them, and the Akira class vessels and the Prometheus class vessels, but aside from them, it is not a military organization, despite having a military hierarchical system and a military structure, but it's not a military organization. But let's face it, it is in part. Just a very quick aside mention. Shane, you know who you are. Just saw this as a comment earlier. I'm just wanting to let you know you are now officially a Star Trek 47 reference. You're welcome. Before we get started, like, share, subscribe, comment down below, let me know what you think about this topic, this video, and check out the other ones in the playlist that are likely linked in this video somewhere, as well as the ones on the rest of my channel. There's a lot of Star Trek content on there if you want to go back and have a look at it. This video is on the hoppers. These are only mentioned in dialogue, so unfortunately I don't have any proper images for them, so I'm relying on fan art and generic imagery, so I'm sorry, there's not really anything to them. And the way this is going to be a bit of supposition is I'm going to give you what we know about the hoppers within Starfleet and what's likely to be on them as well. But bear in mind, absence of canon information, this is more my head canon, so take that as you will. And feel free to disagree with me in the comments down below. The hopper was a type of, for lack of a better term, it's a type of shuttle. It's a light utility transportation vehicle multi-role space frame, usually utilized in the military context. In the times we have known them to be used, they're used in a military environment where the enemy, in the main cases where these have been seen used to be used, were the Klingons, were using transport inhibitors. This meant that transporting around the battlefield to and from the planet, from a ship in orbit, from a base on the ground to another location, as well as transporting munitions and supplies and equipment around, becomes a non-starter. Neither the Klingons nor the Federation could do this. The only way to get about was the old-fashioned way: run, use aircraft and transports. The hoppers are specifically designed for a military context in this use. They're used for medical extraction, general troop transportation, and that's about it. They are purpose-built and designed for this task. That's why I say they're a type of shuttle. They are capable of space flight, but we're at the end of what we know. We don't actually know what they look like or exactly what they were capable of or how fast they were. But let's go into a little bit of supposition about them. In terms of appearance, as Starfleet has typically a method of building on old world designs, we can assume if they're a type of armored APC, which is what they are, but flight, so they're going to be a descendant of those kinds of craft. So they're basically going to be a big box of a craft with a door either on the bottom or the back or the sides or all of the above for troops to embark and disembark the craft. It will likely have at least anti-personnel phasers and perhaps higher munitions, such as a photonic missile or micro-torpedoes, the possibility that it can deploy mines or even drop munitions onto targets, a type of bombing. It's likely Starfleet would want a multi-role frame because they wouldn't want to use different design crafts and multiple different types of crafts. It's likely the kind of weapons these would carry would not be much above those of a shuttle, if even to the same caliber, but I can guarantee they would have had some kind of anti-personnel capability. They will have had shields, onboard medical supplies, and despite the fact that they were used in the absence of when transporters can't be operated, I bet they had a transporter unit on board. Just on the basis of if you can ever knock that out, these things have become very, very useful for beaming soldiers to and from them as well. It'd be a quicker way of deployment. The reason I think there would have been a hatch underneath as well as on the backhand or side is because it would have been faster for these things to basically strafe at a target, hover over it, or run past it and deploy either the equivalent of 24th century paratroopers or people using some kind of descent pack or other equipment, maybe in advanced inertial dampeners that would cushion their fall, who knows. These were most likely employed by the eponymous and aforementioned Starfleet Marines, a very rarely encountered organization. Aspects of it, though, do crop up from time to time, such as Colonel West, as well as Marines appearing in Star Trek VI, and what I can only assume were Marines that were embarked aboard the Enterprise refit during the encounter with V'ger. Although that is a bit of an unconfirmed, they could have just been sort of beefed up security, but Marines are basically onboard ship security. Starfleet Marines by the 24th and 23rd centuries even was a much smaller organisation than what it originally started out as, but assets like these would be greatly beneficial and would likely something they would train with. Whereas I can see regular Starfleet security and regular Starfleet personnel not operating and training with these craft, and would have probably have had specialist units, which is why I say they would most likely be associated with the Starfleet Marines. As I said, they're only ever engaged in hostile actions. These are not scout craft, they're not scientific and research. They're likely to be, again, this isn't confirmed, but they're obviously going to be armor plated. They're not just going to have a normal shuttle armor hull, they're going to have actual armor designed to take a few hits from an enemy. They probably weren't warp capable. Such a system on board them would make them vulnerable, it would make them unnecessary. They would likely be transported into battle by another craft. Maybe the sort of, not that these are canon, but the Typhon class aircraft carriers, or fighter carriers rather, that were basically a big Nimitz carrier in space. Or more likely just a Galaxy class starship or other such vessel, maybe an Akira class, something of that nature, which can carry a lot of shuttles. These things will be very useful. They would probably operate with a fighter escort, because these ships are not likely a fighter craft, and although I bet they're capable of pretty decently maneuvering, they're not going to be well-armed ship-to-ship engagements. Maybe some anti-personnel capabilities. Now, we do know that Starfleet built different specialized variants of this craft. For example, you would have had medical variants, you would have had a tactical variant, which would have been the one that would have definitely been used for deploying troops. You might have had an evacuation version, which maybe had more space inside of it for cargo or people, evacuating civilians, etc., etc. But that is the Starfleet Hopper. Also, I should point out, Hopper does not sound like an official designation term to me by Starfleet. It sounds like a nickname, like how Tom Paris called the Delta Flyer, and I'm sure that's some wonderful technical name as well. So, I highly doubt they were really called a Hopper, but the military does like to give names like that to things. The personnel encountered in the battlefields where these were seen deployed, such as Chief Burke, does imply the presence of a military force on that planet, not Starfleet regular security personnel. Although I do believe that by the 24th century, considering the long period of peace that the Federation had endured, a sort of golden age of science and exploration, Starfleet Marines, which are already a dwindling organization, would have probably dwindled even further, probably only numbering in the thousands of personnel. And even then, I bet a lot of them doubled. They would have taken double shifts. There would have only been a handful of professional soldiers, would be my guess, within Starfleet by this point. And the rest would be taking double duty. Additional augmented training, security personnel, things of that nature. Called on and given the up guns and increased weaponry and armour when needed. But that is my, admittedly, a good portion of that is like 80% my headcanon hypothesis. The guaranteed factual information we know about them is hoppers were used to move troops, supplies, evacuate medical personnel, evacuate the wounded and civilians around a battlefield, in or out of it. Other than that, even saying something as much as they had shields, transporters, even saying they didn't have a warp drive is all entirely my headcanon, because I can see how a warp drive would be just a drain on power and not really needed for something that was really realistically used primarily in atmosphere. But I can see it being spacefaring because it will be brought to a planet by a starship, and a starship, if you're using these things because transporters don't work, are not going to be able to beam the ship to the surface, and otherwise you'd have to tow it under tractor beam from a fighter or a shuttle, which kind of negates the purpose of it. So they would be capable of spaceflight, but it might not have been their primary theatre of operation. With all that said, we're at the end of this relatively speculative video. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and we're now at the end. Bye bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.